1 year into his mandate, Premier Doug Ford opted for a much quieter summer this year, adjourning the House until after the federal election in late October. He might also have been hoping to put to rest the cronyism scandal that just days after his first cabinet shuffle forced out his chief of staff. A few policy reboots and some good news announcements later, we're wondering, has the Premier turned the page? Let's find out with Martin Regcon, the Toronto Star's Ontario politics columnist, Brian Lilley, political columnist at the Toronto Sun, Lauren McDonald, former Director of Marketing in Premier Ford's office, now Director of Digital Public Affairs and Campaign Strategy at the communications firm Proof, and Alison Smith, publisher of Queen's Park Today and co-host of the Canada Land Provincial Politics podcast, Wag the Doug, which is a great name for a podcast. That is really good. Nice to have everybody here, you two for the first time.
Yes.
Great to see you.
Thanks for having us.
Let's put you, Alison, to work right away. Has the Ford government, in your view, shown Ontarians that it's turned over a new leaf?
I think they've shown Ontarians that they have improved their communication strategies, that they can make good news announcements, like you said. But I don't think we've seen proof that Premier Doug Ford, Douglas Robert Ford, has really changed as a politician in any real meaningful way. We still see Ford out there contradicting his ministers and his policies when he makes press conferences. We still see them pushing the Ontario News Now agenda. And I think that any sort of mea culpa speech that, is perhaps predicted or as will be the real thing that, makes it seem like Ford has turned over a new leaf. I don't know if he's presented enough of a vision for Ontario that people are really going to buy that.
Lauren, your view.
Yeah, I think that the Premier has had an opportunity. We had the cabinet shuffle and over the course of the summer, new faces to be able to take some time, go back into their communities, meet with constituents and start to really understand their portfolios. We did say that there have been a couple good news announcements over the summer. There's been some infrastructure. There's been some partnerships with the federal government. There was a recent announcement on guns and gangs with the City of Toronto. All of these showing that he's willing to be a partner and they're really taking a new tone going into the fall.
Martin.
Well, change is in the air. He's changed his chief of staff. He has changed his cabinet. He has changed the way the government approaches messaging and some of its policies. It's dialing down beer and corner stores. It's trying to dial down some of the temperature with teachers, for example. So they've changed a lot of things, but they haven't changed the Premier. And the Premier is a force of nature. And we will have to wait and see whether that message, whether he actually changes his own style, and whether it's not too late for that change to take effect with the way voters perceive his behavior.
Brian.
I'm going to disagree just slightly with Martin, and that's on has the Premier changed? Because I was out at the Guns and Gangs announcement with Toronto Mayor John Tory, and I looked at Ford's staff and I said, did he not get his coffee today? He seemed completely sedate, and this goes to the change of communications. Yeah, has he changed his policies? Maybe not. He's dialing it down, as Martin was saying, but he's less combative.
Do you like that about him?
Well, I think voters will. I think that's what they're trying to do. Doug Ford, if you've known Doug Ford for a while, he's actually not that combative a guy. He is a bit of a pushover and a pussycat. He'll hate that I say that, but if you know the guy, yeah, he doesn't like that people don't like him. He's going to fret over that. So he worries about these things. And then him deciding that he's not going to engage, I wrote about this a while ago. I said his attempt is to push back against Justin Trudeau gently, because Justin Trudeau's out there trying to bait him into the federal election every single day. That's Trudeau's plan in Ontario. And Ford so far hasn't taken the bait, which surprises me. I thought he would have jumped right in and been, a brawler. And I'm at this event and journalists are asking him questions and he's kind of like Doug Ford on Valium.
Well, since you work for him, I want to ask about that. Have you and other former advisors or current advisors said to the Premier, I think it was Melissa Lantzman who on this program said, he's a bull who brings his own china shop with him. Have you guys all told him to tone it down?
I think the Premier, especially going into this, the new cabinet shuffle, going into the summer period of time, has taken a bit of a step back. And, he's acknowledged that there's been some challenges in the first year of government. And he's introspective. He's able to, look at himself and look at, what his perception has been. And I think that, whether it's his advisors or whether it's he himself, I think he's really looking to be able to connect with voters. That's why he was, touring the province all summer, meeting with people and getting to hear what the real concerns of Ontarians are.
Well, let me follow up on that, because you said while you were there in the Premier's office that the why was missing from a lot of the policy announcements that the government was making. What do you mean by that?
So I think when it comes down to some complex policies, one of the big things that the Premier's office, myself included in my time there, was, when you're announcing complex policy without giving the public really the reasoning behind it. What is your motive? Why are you making the decisions that you're making? And you and I can go back and forth on the fiscal policies of this government, but at the end of the day, what they are trying to focus on is getting the books back in balance. People didn't elect Doug Ford for status quo. They elected him to get things back on track.
So can I just jump in? I'm sorry.
Well, to my mind, I mean, we can give the Premier perhaps credit for being introspective upon finding out that his poll numbers have plummeted and that he was, getting booed at the Raptors victory parade. However, or, being Premier on Valium. However, how long does this last, right? We know that if he's toning it down for the federal election campaign, whoever wins and is about to form government is going to have a lot more to worry about than, poking the Doug Ford bear any longer. So are they just waiting it out? And I mean, I kind of want to push back on what you said, Brian, that, that Doug Ford's not a combative person. We have a history of him in politics at City Council. We saw him slash City Council weeks after being made Premier. I think that we know that he likes a fight, and I don't really see that part of his human nature really changing, post-October.
Mark.
Can I try to draw this together? I think I agree with Allison that everyone knows he can be combative in the ring. But I think what Brian was hinting at is that he actually is somewhat more self-aware than people give him credit for. This is a bit of a backhanded compliment. I'm not trying to be mischievous, but when you are booed at a Raptors celebration when everyone's in a good mood, and Justin Trudeau gets cheered, and John Tory gets cheered, well, most people would figure out you have a problem, and Doug Ford is one of those. That's what he is introspective about, the booing. Mick Jagger dropped his name at a Rolling Stones concert. The crowd booed. That hurts. So he's aware of that, and he realizes that he has messed up in some ways, even if he's not willing or able to say that publicly in so many words. Just to what Lauren was saying about the why is missing. I think Lauren's right. There needs to be more why. But I don't think that was the missing piece for many of the policy problems.
What was the missing piece?
Well, for example, the stickers on 25,000 gas pumps in the province. Why? Well, actually, the government said why. Greg Rickford said, we want to stick it to the federal Liberals.
The energy minister.
Yeah, he said that in the legislature.
I
That's
believe
the
that
why.
he said he wanted to bring transparency to the carbon tax.
Yeah, that's what he said. And he also said, we want to stick it to the federal Liberals.
He might have said both.
So where's the transparency? The transparency is they're not saying that you actually get rebated. He says that the carbon tax is going to cost you, when in fact the stickers don't say it won't cost you anything, because you'll get a $300 rebate as verified by the Parliamentary Budget Office.
Brian, let me get you in here to talk about, I think, probably the guy who's been the most controversial chief of staff of any premier in Ontario history, and that's Dean French, who, of course, has subsequently left the scene. How much of the government's confrontational, blustery, bull in a china shop approach was because of him versus that's the premier's nature?
I think more than 50% would have been on Dean. I don't disagree with Allison that the premier can be combative, but when I got to know Doug Ford inside and outside of politics over the last 10 years, covering him both as a politician and just chatting with him when he was outside politics, and he can be introspective. Yeah, does he show up for a fight sometimes? Like any good politician would. I've never met one that's successful that wouldn't. But you'll surround yourself with people that will either temper or inflame things with you. And Dean French was the kind of guy that would inflame things, for better or worse. And I have no ill will towards Dean French, but he wasn't a good fit for the premier that Doug Ford was. And you just have to look at the cabinet shuffle. That was about a reset. And I don't I don't remember if you were there, Allison, but I know Martin, believe you were there. We're doing the scrum with Doug Ford right after the cabinet shuffle's announced. And I said to him, is the fact that you've put all these people into new positions where you've got communications problems and you've taken your best communicators and put them in, is it a signal that you've got a communications problem? He said, Brian, you're 100% right. Explain that they got to do communications better. 2 hours later, you've got the news release going out about these unqualified people getting jobs.
The patronage scandal.
And that blew apart any good news that they were going to get. They handled the cabinet shuffle relatively well, considering what they were going into it with. And that blew it up. And so within 24 hours, I'm writing the column saying Dean French has to go. And he was gone. There's an incredibly different tone now that he's not there. Full disclosure, by the way, Jamie Wallace, who is now the chief of staff, was the guy that hired me at the Toronto Sun for the second time.
You've anticipated my follow-up, which is that, yes, he ran the Sun newspapers. You worked for the Sun. I presume you knew him well. How do you see things changing now that he's in charge?
It's just a different tone. And I talk to him once in a while, no more than I talk to any other person in that sort of position. But it is a different tone. He's a very calm individual. Trying to get Jamie Wallace excited is a difficult task.
How do you see things changing, Allison, now that we have a new chief of staff in the Premier's office?
I mean, to my mind, it's a good thing, right? I mean, the last thing, this has been said before, but the last thing people want, or politicians want, is their chief of staff on the cover of the newspaper, right? People behind the scenes shouldn't be out front and center. And, you know, by all accounts, he was making MPPs cry. And, you know, you don't want that either. However, I mean, if we're framing this around a reset, how much credit do we really want to give a government or a premier for, you know, hiring a reasonable and responsible top manager within 14 months of being elected? I mean, that's good, but it's kind of, to me, seems like a pretty low bar to be congratulating someone for.
Why don't we state the obvious, which is that Doug Ford became the Premier of Ontario with no experience in provincial politics.
Absolutely.
He had as his chief of staff, Dean French, who had no experience in provincial politics, or virtually none. And these two are now running a, what's the latest budget, $150 billion corporation? You know, maybe we shouldn't be surprised, Martin, that there were a lot of bumps on the road in the first year.
I think that's a fair point. I think that's part of the explanation, but it doesn't explain away Allison's point. I think it could have taken less than 14 months to figure out that they didn't know what they were doing, or that Dean French thought he knew what he was doing by picking a fight everywhere. There's no question they came in, that we saw that with the NDP government of Bob Rae, for example. They didn't think they were going to win, and they were flummoxed in their first few months. So fair point, but I think we can't ignore the mess that Dean French left behind. Brian talked about the Premier's response to his question about communications being the problem. But that's not all the Premier said that time. Right after that, at that very news conference after the shuffle, you may remember he said, the challenge is, the problem is, the media is the opposition. You guys are the opposition. So the antagonism resurfaced right then and there in that post-shuffle cabinet. And sure enough, that big scandal that you talked about only came to light, if we believe the Premier's office, when the media served it up to him and made him aware that this was an unseemly patronage scandal.
Can I, okay, you were there. You worked in that office.
Yes.
So you know Dean French. You worked with Dean French.
Yes.
We have numerous accounts of, we've heard one already today, Dean French upbraided an MPP so harshly in front of colleagues that she cried. He chaired cabinet meetings, and sat at the cabinet table, which is also unprecedented. I've heard expressions used such as he basically had a reign of terror in the way he ran things. You were there. Did you see that?
I think that's a little over the top. You know, Dean and I got along just fine. And at the end of the day, when we're looking at what, you know, the Premier is planning to do going forward, he's governing for the people of Ontario. He's meeting with people around the province. He is not knocking on doors, listening to people complain about whatever it was that happened with Dean French. I think that people, are talking about affordability issues and, ballot box issues going into the federal election. I don't think that Dean French is going to be top of mind for most people outside of our bubble.
The name Dean French may not be top of mind outside the bubble. That's a fair point. But the notion, and Brian, I'll use your words, the notion that unqualified people got well-paid patronage jobs to which they had no business getting. That's very off-brand for Doug Ford. How did those appointments get through?
You know, I wasn't involved in the appointment process at all in my time in the Premier's office, but what I can say is that the Premier has committed to reviewing those appointments, and that process is underway. Whatever the results of that process are, I guess we'll find out later in the fall when the House comes back or whenever it concludes. But the Premier is really committed to ensuring that he's rebuilding this relationships across with municipalities. He's been doing announcements with federal government over the course of the summer. So I think that he's listening, he's learning, and the pace at which the Premier and the rest of us came into government was, it was quick, and we went right to it. And now that they've taken the summer off to be able to, reset, learn a little bit about their portfolios,
and stay out of Andrew Scheer's way. Let's be blunt about it. Brian, I want to go to you on that, because one does hear comments such as, and this is from federal candidates for the Conservative Party, Ford could really sink us. And I want to know what effect you think provincial policy and provincial shenanigans could have on Andrew Scheer's chance of becoming Prime Minister on the 21st of October.
Less than a few weeks ago, we'll see what it's like a few weeks from now. The temperature, as I said, has been toned down at Queen's Park, and not just because they're on a break until summer. It is a new tone, a different way of operating the government, and a less combative style. Speaking to a couple of different candidates yesterday, there are a couple of different campaigns. They're hearing much less about Doug Ford than they were 3-4 weeks ago. They said they would get it back then, especially end of June, early July. That was more likely to come up at the door. Now it's more what the Liberals are throwing at them now, and that's the nature of politics. We've got 5 weeks left in the campaign. There's going to be a lot more mud thrown from all sides, and it's going to change. So Doug Ford isn't the factor that he was a few weeks ago. He definitely has been a factor that has drawn down on the federal Conservative support. I think it's been a little overblown in some of the media commentary compared to what the actual polling is, but it was definitely there. We'll see if it continues or if the Premier stays on Valium like he was with John Tory.
Do you see a Ford factor in this federal election campaign?
I mean, I think even the fact that the Conservatives are having to pull back on Doug Ford is an overall negative for him, right? I mean, maybe a year ago, they were hoping that Ford could be a Jason Kenney for them, who right now is incredibly popular in Alberta post his election in May. He's going to be out there in the GTA, apparently also potentially in Vancouver, bringing up the votes. And really what Ford has become for the Conservative Party is the antithesis of that, right?
Say that again. That's very interesting. The Premier of Alberta is going to campaign for the federal Conservatives in Ontario and British Columbia.
That is what we're hearing, yeah.
Huh.
Yeah, in the 905, in fact, where Jason Kenney made so much headway when he was Minister of Immigration federally under the Harper government. I would agree that you can't. I've never believed you could sustain an anti-Ford federal election strategy beyond a few weeks. I think they were just kind of trying to set the table, put Scheer on the defensive, put Ford under wraps, and clear a bit more runway for themselves. But you can't run a federal campaign realistically for 7, 8, 9 weeks from August through late October batting Doug Ford. That said, Allison makes a fair point that Doug Ford had fantasies a year ago of being a Kenney-like character. And there's a bit of tension sometimes in that relationship, especially with Dean French and Jason Kenney. But Ford has not just been overshadowed, he's been put in the shadows, he's been put away. And I think to your earlier point about, well, has Ford turned over a new leaf and is he less of a liability in this federal campaign? We don't know yet. There's this tendency to blame Dean French for everything. Mm-hmm. And I think, yes, there was a reign of error and a reign of terror under Dean French, but Doug Ford was still the man in charge, and they were very tight. And other than perhaps appointing the lacrosse player to New York, and by Dean French, because Dean French, as some of us would know, is a lacrosse fan, or Dean French arranging for the appointment of his wife's cousin to London. And I misspoke, Dean French appointing. It wasn't Dean French's appointment. It was a cabinet appointment, an order in council. People sign off on those appointments. The Premier says he wasn't aware.
I'm jumping in here. If you're a cabinet minister and you think that your future in that
Oh, yes.
body depends on you being on the right side of Dean French,
100%.
you're going to pass that order in council.
100%. But I'm saying, all I'm saying is that
ends-
you're accountable, and the premier, more importantly, is accountable. That's the
That and you
takeaway.
have to rely on top staffers. And if the Premier's Chief of Staff says, we vetted these people, which I am told by cabinet ministers who asked, yes, we vetted, they're all good. You can't sit there and have cabinet ministers Google checking and vetting every
But
appointment.
has anyone asked the question whether we actually need a trade envoy in Dallas or a trade envoy in Chicago?
Apparently,
or
we
a
never,
trade...
we haven't for 30 years.
Correct. And who shot that down? The new Democratic Party.
Bob Ray fired them all.
That's right, because they were trying to cut down on expenses. And Doug Ford has brought back trade envoys to the United States of America.
If you were running the Conservative campaign federally right now in the upcoming federal election, you have the Premier of Alberta campaigning apparently over places outside of his home province for you. Would you have Doug Ford campaign for you in Ontario?
You know, I think that Doug Ford has a really strong presence across Ontario. There are obviously certain ridings, you know, in and around Etobicoke where he is more popular, more recognized. That's where his family's from. I think when it comes to the federal campaign, the Premier's really been focused on governing and dealing with things in Ontario. I can't imagine that he's going to probably campaign with Andrew Scheer going into the fall.
Well, the reason I ask you the question, sorry, Brian, but let me just get this on the record. The reason I ask you the question is Kathleen Wynne in the last federal election did 30 events for Justin Trudeau. That wasn't by accident. She wanted him to win, and they were happy to have her on side. She, only just won a majority government a year earlier, as Doug Ford has only just won a majority government a year earlier. You want to go back 35 years. We're sitting here today on the 35th anniversary of the biggest majority government in Canadian history, and Bill Davis campaigned like hell for Brian Mulroney all across the province of Ontario. Doesn't the federal Conservative leader want the leader of a majority government in Ontario to campaign for him?
Well, I think Doug Ford's shown that he is willing to work with whoever is, leader federally. He's been working pretty closely in terms of some transit announcements.
But Scheer won't say Ford's name. He won't say his name. What does that tell you?
You know what? I think that their relationship is just fine. They're, both working really hard to fight against the carbon tax federally, and I think that both of those pieces are things that they can connect on really closely. And whether or not they're campaigning together as an aside, the Premier is really focused on how things are working in Ontario and connecting over the course, and he's coming back right after the federal election.
Well,
Yes, he is.
in
Okay,
truth,
Brian.
the relationship was strained after that piece by CBC where Conservatives federally were talking about how Doug Ford could sink us. And that infuriated the Premier, but I know there have been back-channel discussions back and forth. If they were smart, the federal Conservatives would have Doug Ford campaigning with local candidates in the areas around Toronto where he is strong, in Etobicoke, in Scarborough, in Markham, in Vaughan, in all of these suburban ridings that the Conservatives need to win. Does that mean he has to go out with Andrew Scheer? Not necessarily. He can go out with local candidates. Political party leaders go up and down. 2011, Stephen Harper could do no wrong for the federal Conservatives. 2015, he became toxic. 2015, Justin Trudeau was, by the end of the campaign, the messiah for the Liberals. I'm not saying he's toxic to them now, but nobody has Team Trudeau on their signs anymore. These things ebb and flow, and you've got to be able to use your leaders and your key players smartly, which is why Jason Kenney is coming into multi-ethnic ridings. From when he was, his nickname, talk to him or anyone around him, his nickname was Minister of Curry in a Hurry. So he's going to places in Brampton and Mississauga and areas with strong multi-ethnic communities.
Where he's very popular.
Very popular.
From his days as multiculturalism minister, we should say, in Harper's government. Allison, let me read this to you, and we'll get you to comment on it first, and maybe go around the table a bit on it. Sheldon, I am at the top of page 5. Let's bring this graphic up. This is Scott Reed, the former Paul Martin advisor, writing in the Globe and Mail last month. Doug Ford wants Justin Trudeau's Liberals to win the federal election. Why? Because Mr. Ford believes he can win the federal election that will then follow, the one that will come once he replaces a vanquished Andrew Scheer after the Conservatives stampede to Queen's Park to beg the big, loud Premier of Canada's largest province to take the reins as federal leader. I know what you're thinking, but that's nuts. No, that's Ford Nation. Weigh in, if you would. Does that make any sense?
That's a hot take, as they call it.
Yeah.
I mean, we mentioned this earlier, that Doug Ford last year did seem to have visions of, prime ministership. And we obviously know he's an ambitious guy who, likes power and wants to move up in the world and, grasp and aim as high as he can. However, does he want Justin Trudeau to win this election? I'm really not necessarily convinced that that's the case. Although, however, if we're going to go back to, contradictory remarks by the premier that I was mentioning earlier, just the other week, he was asked whether or not his government would appeal Justin Trudeau's carbon backstop pricing to the Supreme Court. It's already been shot down in Ontario. And he said, well, maybe not. I'm paraphrasing, but if Justin Trudeau's elected, that's sort of that's democracy. We'll let people, we'll abide democracy, I believe is what he said. And then 4 days later, I guess in a bid to look strong, I believe would be my read of it, they announced that the Supreme Court appeal, or the appeal to the Supreme Court is going ahead of the election. So it seems like, Doug Ford has Trudeau as his adversary, and right now that's working for him. But I can't see him wanting to keep it that way.
Martin, this is really, this gets very, very bizarre, because at some level, it's not a bad thing for Doug Ford if Justin Trudeau wins. Mm-hmm. Running against the feds is a great foil, and you can do it a lot better, obviously, when the other party's in power right there. Have you bought into this theory, though? And you're right, that was a hot take around Queen's Park for a long time last year, that somehow Doug Ford wants to be Prime Minister of Canada, and he's hoping Scheer loses so that Scheer will be out and he can go for that. You buying that?
I like Scott Reid very much. I love what he writes, and I think he was right a year ago. And we wrote about that a year ago. And it started when Doug Ford went to a federal conservative convention in Nova Scotia, and people were asking Andrew Scheer to take pictures of them with Doug Ford. Doug Scheer was relegated to the anonymous photographer, and Doug Ford was the big celebrity. That was then, this is now. And it's more obvious than ever that Doug Ford not only doesn't speak French, he doesn't understand francophones. He didn't know until about a year ago that there were francophones in Ontario.
He's basically given up on his promise to learn French
as
well.
He has antagonized Quebecers by virtue of sacrificing some linguistic rights in Ontario. So I think those federal ambitions, that fantasy, that dream has gone crashing down. Does he want to have an antagonistic government, as you suggest, in Ottawa? Absolutely. I think every premier understands that it is better for them to have someone to punch up against as opposed to someone who might be an albatross down the road. But I think Allison's point is a good one. It's crazy, it's cuckoo pops that he has said, I will respect democracy. Voters have a chance. He said this many times, by the way, that voters will have a chance to vote on the carbon tax plan. Well, actually, they did in the last federal election when Trudeau got a mandate for a carbon tax. But then, a few days later, they launched this appeal to the Supreme Court, and the minister said, we need to use every tool in our toolbox, like by any means necessary. Why? You just said you were going to respect democracy.
Do you, Brian, given that you know the premier sort of away from Queen's Park, you know him a little more personally than maybe the rest of us here, do you think he's ever given up on the dream of being Prime Minister of Canada?
I'm not sure he ever had that dream. I know there was a lot of speculation around that, and I get the appeal for him at the time. But I've always thought that Doug Ford just wanted to be mayor of Toronto and was running the province, as someone that, just moved back to Toronto from Ottawa. We were sitting in Ottawa saying, hey, the rest of the province is here. Give up on Toronto. I think that was his great ambition, and he ended up becoming premier. He doesn't speak French. His main areas of interest politically are not at the federal level. So I think if there was a bit of a temptation there, I agree with Martin, it's probably gone at this point. The idea of being able to punch up versus how much he does not like Justin Trudeau, which one's going to weigh, I would be willing to bet he doesn't want Justin Trudeau to win. That's where I would go with that. As far as the whole carbon tax thing, I was at that event. He did talk about respecting democracy, but it was kind of an echo of what he has said before, where he's talked about when voters get a chance at this, they reject it. And so he's respecting democracy. So I was sitting there listening, and maybe just because the guy doesn't always fully expound on his thought, I'm listening and, hearing what he has said before and assuming that's what he meant. I didn't take that they were going to walk away from it. So I wasn't shocked when they said that they were going to launch the appeal Saskatchewan's launched their appeal, but they were both split decisions. I've covered Supreme Courts long enough not to try and guess which way a court's going to go.
We should take a moment here, Lauren, just to talk about something else that transpired over the summer that may not be the most crushing issue in Ontario politics today, but it got a little bit of attention because Doug Ford is an extremely different premier for many reasons, one of which was he used to spend a lot of time on this, calling people. And he'd give them his phone number. And he would call Mr. and Mrs. Everyday Ontario all the time and respond to their concerns.
Yeah.
And if they weren't there, he'd leave a voicemail. Hi, it's Doug Ford calling. Thanks for the call, and da-da-da-da. He shut the line down. That's not happening anymore. How much do you think he regrets that?
You know what, I think that what was happening with the Premier's cell phone, and every political staffer's nightmare is having your boss go off and not knowing what they're saying to people, so you can't keep tabs. But the Premier has always been that person. His brother was that person. They want to respond, and this is actually countering what Alison had said earlier, where you pointed out that the Premier likes power, and I would actually say that the Premier likes people and likes people to like him. And so, when the Premier was using that device as a means of communication between, direct line of communication to constituents, I think he was really happy with the way that was rolling. And, unfortunately, it got abused by, special interest groups who were bombarding him. And second to that, some of the messages that this man was receiving were absolutely repulsive. And, understanding that social media is often a tool that people use. And, I'm sure all of us around the table have, had our fair share of people saying mean things to us on Twitter. But, getting it, waking up in the middle of the night to your phone going off with some, horribly awful things is not, beneficial. And so the tool that was being utilized for, a really great purpose, unfortunately, was no longer serving that goal.
I'm sorry, but I think objectively this phone line was always a terrible idea. So shutting it down was a good idea. I'll say that.
What was so terrible about it?
Well, it does. Why should people be able to phone the Premier on the phone? All it does is sow confusion, right? If you're someone who really needs help with any number of services or healthcare or anything in the province, and you get the most powerful guy on the phone on the line, he tells you he's going to make it okay. Are you either that is problems with people jumping a line to get things faster than others, which is undemocratic and unfair, or the Premier tells you that he's going to help you, and really, why should he either be wasting his time helping one small person when his job is, the entire system, or is he actually going to be able to do that? We saw there someone, I'm not going to remember the gentleman's name, but a researcher FOI'd the Premier's office Freedom of Information request of the Premier's office after Premier Doug Ford said numerous times that if people needed legal aid help, they should contact his office and he will help them. We saw the emails that he was responding to these folks that needed help. He pawned them off on the federal Minister of Immigration. He pawned them off on the Attorney General of Ontario. He's not actually capable of helping anybody that way. So presenting this phone line as if it is a tool that people should be utilizing to contact him is foolish.
I got 30 left. Martin, you take it.
Well, let's be human about this. Everybody loves the idea of human contact. It has some special appeal, but it's not sustainable in a province of 13.7 million people, and we shouldn't be surprised that you get hostility. Premier knows that. He has OPP bodyguards because people aren't always nice, and I don't condone for a second the kind of abuse he exposed himself to, but are we surprised?
I want to thank everybody for coming in for program number 2 of season number 14 here on the agenda. Great to have you two back again, and nice to have you two here for the first time.
Thanks for having us.
See you all again down the road.
Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Steve.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. And by viewers like you. Thank you.